Mr. Mixer's Mortuary and Pizzeria, where yesterday's loss is today's sauce. How may I help you? This is my well-loved KitchenAid that was given to me as a wedding present. It is quite the workhorse. It took a sad jump off my counter while kneading bread dough, and it has quite the bounce to it. I would love to see a video of you fixing it, but if you can't, that's fine. I can't wait to get back to making all of the delicious things. You can tag me on TikTok if you make a video. Well, let's do it. This mixer looks absolutely fantastic for a machine that took a nosedive off the counter. I don't hardly see a blemish on it. Usually it's pretty easy to notice a machine that's fallen off the counter because there's going to be a kiss right here where it fell and hit the ground. Now we see a lot of evidence of leaked oil right here. But we'll take care of that with the regrease. Let's give this thing a listen. It actually sounds pretty good. It's going way too fast in that first speed, so we are going to have to do some tuning. And I'm guessing when it fell off the counter, this is where it hit. Because this front end is bent up. Look what happens when I put some pressure right here. You can see the back of that base just rising. So it's kind of bent and rocking like this. But no worries, we're going to take care of all of that. Let's get started. We're going to start by removing the back cap. It's just this one screw. And that allows us to just pull this back cap out of place. It's not terribly dirty back here. Things look pretty good. Now to remove this beauty band, we got one screw here and one screw right over here. With the screws out, we can go ahead and remove this band. Look at that oil. It just looks like veins. That's amazing. This thing has actually leaked quite a bit of oil. Look all around that. The band's looking a little grody too. Now before we go any further, we don't want to forget to wipe. It'll help us not be so messy as we move forward. Now to remove this dripper, we've got a flathead screwdriver. We're going to give that a few taps with a mallet. And once we tap that down a little ways, it should just pull off like that. Next, to remove this pin right here, we're going to give that a few taps with a punch. And with the pin removed, we can just pull down on that planetary. And then lastly, we got to remove some screws. There's 5 around the planetary head here, there's 2 in the body here, and then 1 on the back on each side. Now, if at this point in the process you're saying, screw that, well, that's why we accept mixers for repair, so that you don't have to do it. We now have all of the screws out, but before we take this machine apart, let's admire these decals. They're pretty neat. I always love to see a little flair on these machines. All right, we got those heads split in half. Take a look at all that grease. If you look right here, you can just see pools of oil, and this is the stuff that is leaking out of your machine. This stuff can leak out. It gets on your hands, it gets in your food, which is one of the main reasons why we do this regrease process. We're going to replace this grease with the highest quality food-safe grease available. But in the meantime, in between time, we're going to have to go through here and get all of this old grease out of the machine. And honestly, this is the fun part. It feels a lot more like playing than actual work. But I'm in here all by my lonesome, so I guess I'm just playing with myself. Now there's always a bunch of grease right here on this shaft, so I found that giving it a good reach around is the best way to get that off of there. We're going to go ahead and give this shaft a few taps. And that's going to reveal this pin right here. We're just going to remove that by hand. Taking a look at this pin, you can tell that it is bent right there. And that's because it has that little tiny crack right there. That'll need to be replaced. That's the attention to detail we put into these things. Now we can give this shaft a little percussive maintenance. Now we can go ahead and remove this shaft, which will then allow us to remove this center gear. In fact, we're going to go ahead and remove all of these gears. This one actually has 3 screws in it. 1 here, 1 there, and then 1 in the backside over here. And we do that so that we can get in between all of these gear teeth. That way we can get everything nice and clean, which really helps with inspection. Aren't candy apple suckers the best? If you don't get the teeth clean, you'll miss little things like this little chip in the gear right here. Now this is a very sturdy gear. We don't like to throw parts of things if we don't have to. It's going to be no problem to leave this in place, but it is nice to do a full inspection. Now before we go any further, here's another little thing that I caught here. When this thing fell and got hit really hard, it looks like it bent this shaft on the lock lever. Take a look at how straight a new one is for comparison. We need to find this little set screw right here, and we're going to go ahead and remove that. Once we get it unscrewed, we can pull that out. You can see it's just like a little threaded pin. Then we have one more set screw right here that we need to remove to take the lever off. We'll go ahead and drop that new one down into place, and then go ahead and reinstall our screws. There we go. That's going to allow us to get a nice firm lock. Now it's time to get our hands back in the grease. We're going to put a nice base layer on here. Then we dropped our center gear into place and slid the planetary pin up through, and we got that new pin that we have to replace. Just like that, our center gear is back in place. Now we have the rest of the gears installed. It is time to add a little bit more grease. We don't want to forget about the undercarriage. We need to get this external ring gear greased up as well. We'll slap on a new gasket here, and then we can mount the heads back together. Sometimes there's a little gap here. It doesn't want to seat properly, so you got to take it for a little spin. There we go. Now screw it all back together. Once I get these screws tight with the drill, I always go back and check by hand. I live by the expression, if you didn't check it by hand, then it isn't tight. Which is probably also why I'll experience death by carpal tunnel. But I always go the extra mile just for you. Now we gotta do a little bit of cleaning. There we go, that's looking better. Now to move into the electronics, we need to tune this thing. It's going way too fast in that first speed. We want to count 60 RPMs. To slow it down a little bit, we need to tighten these top screws. Now the way that I time 60 RPMs is I count how many times it touches my finger over 10 seconds. Now that I have it tuned appropriately, you can hear a little chatter there in the rear end. It goes away as we increase the speeds. And that tells me that this bearing bracket here is worn out. We have to replace that. So we're going to make sure that we're unplugged, and then we need to start pulling all of these clips. And we do that by simply grabbing onto them with some needle nose and popping them out of place. Then we'll grab onto this little spring right here and pull that out of place. And we'll hook it to the end of the towel so it can't shoot up into the machine. Now to remove these top two screws, which will then allow us to remove this speed plate. Now to remove the governor, we have to take our needle nose and put them in just like that. And we'll give those a few taps with a mallet, which then breaks that governor free. Behind that, there's going to be a little pin hiding right here. It's pretty tiny, and we do not want to lose that. We'll remove the ground wire to the power cord, and then the little screw that holds the phase board in place, which will finally allow us to remove these nuts on the bearing bracket. Take a look here, that bearing's got a lot of play in there. New ones should be nice and firm. We'll go ahead and get everything screwed back into place here. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a new speed plate on here. Reason being, we already had the old one off, and it was acting a little funky. It was passable, but since we already have it off, let's replace it. Get all of our wires back in place. They are labeled, but it's red, white, and then blue, black, white, black. There we go. That's sounding better. We're almost done here, but we do got to take care of this bent base. Remember, it's rocking. So we're going to turn it upside down and find that little screw down there and loosen that, which will then allow us to punch out that pin. Now, if your pin is loose and sliding in and out, you'll want to turn it over and tighten that screw that I just loosened. We'll drop the front of this base into a vise and just give it a little pry here. After some bending, we'll find a nice flat surface, and now there's no rock. We got the feet put back on. Take a look at that. It's as flat as the earth. Just kidding. But not about the base. This thing's flat. And the last thing we're going to do here is check the bowl to beater clearance. You can tell that paddle's hitting the bottom of the bowl, which makes sense. This is the customer's paddle. You can tell it's all chipped up from rubbing the bottom. Not only is the paddle damaged, but the head is jumping up and down. So we're going to install our famous Everdime. We're going to lift the head and we're going to remove this screw right here in the neck. With that screw removed, we'll pass it through the Everdime just like that. And then we'll go ahead and reinstall this screw. Now the goal is to tighten this screw down just far enough that when you put on a paddle and drop a dime into the bottom of your bowl, that the head of that paddle passes over and gives that dime just a little flick on each rotation, which will ensure that your paddle is just a dime's height off the bottom of that bowl. That means the attachments aren't going to rub and chip. It also means that all your ingredients are going to be incorporated appropriately. Oh, and did I mention no more head bounce? And just like that, we have a perfectly calibrated, restored KitchenAid mixer. If you're looking to do this repair yourself, we have an extensive parts inventory, as well as all of the grease and tools for you to do the job. If you're not the DIY type, you can actually send them in to us and we can restore the machine for you. We do over 1,000 of these every year. You can find all the details on our website, mrmixer.store. And just because everyone's always curious, I always get the question, this restoration costs $230. Happy Friday the 13th.